Well, there's plenty of reaction to the Ford government's massive 2023 budget delivered yesterday at Queen's Park. And while it charts a path to balance, it is also being criticized for failing to help Ontarians struggling to make ends meet.
I will now ask the pages to deliver the budgets to the members.
Now, the budget is titled Building a Strong Ontario. The nearly $205 billion spending plan is the largest ever in this province. But Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy says the government will be posting surpluses in a year. The budget does include more money for hospitals, home care, and the medical workforce.
The budget forecasts a $1.3 billion deficit this fiscal year, followed by a $200 million surplus next year and a $4.4 billion surplus in 2025 to 26. There's an $850 million increase as well in funding to hospitals and $200 million to grow the healthcare workforce. The budget also includes an additional $425 million for mental health services over the next 3 years.
Now, the budget also contains $22 billion to build more schools and childcare spaces and more than $20 billion in infrastructure like highway, hospitals, and transit projects.
Now, opposition parties are still criticizing the PC fiscal plan, saying it just misses the mark.
I think the Ontario families aren't going to feel the balance that the government's talking about. This government could have balanced the budget and made life a bit easier for Ontario families. Small things like they just want it to be a little bit easier. Like, they want to have a family doc. They don't want to have to wait 15 hours in an emergency room if their son or daughter has exceptional needs, that their needs are being met at school. Those are the things that make life a little bit easier.
It just doesn't address many of the crises that Ontarians are facing, the housing affordability crisis, to the mental health crisis, to the fact that so many people are living in legislative poverty, to the fact that it's not dealing with the climate crisis in a way that makes life affordable for people.
Okay, we've heard from the critics. Now let's hear from the Finance Minister himself, Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, joining us live on CP24 Breakfast. Do appreciate the time this morning, Minister. Let's start here. I know you provided money for homelessness and supportive housing, big ask for municipalities, along with mental health spending. That was big, but I want to kind of circle back to the situation here in Toronto. Nothing necessarily to replace the $510 billion from COVID expenses, nothing to cover that $200 million loss on development charges based on your bill here. So I know there's still a federal budget to come here, but is the province going to be there for Ontario if the feds don't help and step in to help Toronto?
Good to be with you again, Nick. Look, through the pandemic, we were there for Toronto. We were there for municipalities, over $2 billion just for Toronto, for transit and other things. And we continue to support Toronto. You mentioned the supportive housing, something that John Tory took a very keen interest in and led the charge over the last couple of years, and we delivered yesterday. That was Toronto's #1 ask. We do need municipalities to do their part. That's why we're going to be sitting down with them and going through all the numbers. And those are going to be very serious conversations that we're going to have, not just with Toronto, but right across Ontario. But let me tell you this. We are working with municipalities like Toronto, continue to work on infrastructure. For example, hospitals. You mentioned hospitals. I mean, right from Etobicoke and Queensway to North York to Scarborough to Sunnybrook. We're building healthcare right here in Toronto, but right across the province. So we've worked very closely with municipalities. They have to do their part. We'll hear from the federal government next week, and we'll continue to work with them.
Minister, you talk about working with municipalities and sitting down with municipalities, talking about really auditing their books and effectively taking a look at it. Can you talk a little bit about what you're looking for? How will municipalities be judged on their spending and on their priorities? And what will they have to show you? I'm thinking of Toronto in particular, in order to potentially get some more money to help, balance their books, which they legally must do.
Well, look, I mean, definitely dialogue is very important to fund shared priorities, and that's how we do things. And so we've created a path. Our Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, has laid out a very strong plan to create 1.5 million new homes. People are coming to this province in big numbers. We got to have housing. We got to work with municipalities to get it done. So we'll sit down and go through those numbers. But let me tell you, it's not just about housing. We got to have highways. We've started digging for subways. We're building subways in Toronto. We're building public transit right across the province. We got to continue building the highways in the north and southwestern Ontario, eastern Ontario, and right here in Toronto and the GTA. So there's a lot of infrastructure money that we have to do together. That's why I increased the infrastructure budget. That's why we're focused on the economy too. You know, we're not an island here, Nick, in Ontario. We're in a global economy. We're competing for jobs and capital. And what a great story, another great story, Volkswagen coming to Ontario. They could have gone anywhere. They came to Ontario because this is a good place to do business. There's good workers in Ontario. We've got a good healthcare system, and we're going to keep growing this economy and creating really good jobs for the families of Ontario.
And speaking of growth, Minister, you know, of course, because of based on, you know, this $20.6 billion in the sort of tax revenues over the last, you know, year or so that were perhaps a little bit unexpected here. That's a lot of money, good for the province, you know, indeed. But let me ask you this. I want to play out a scenario. If I'm a person, you know, in a job, maybe in my 50s, not thinking about quitting my job or getting a new career, but I'm struggling with the cost of living. I'm struggling with interest rates, with my mortgage, etc. There doesn't seem to be anything sort of in particular, any sort of break or anything for individuals here. What do you say to either critics or taxpayers who say there wasn't really much for me as an individual to help me in these difficult economic times?
Well, we understand that for some and many in the province, you know, these cost of everything has really hurt. And so that's why we moved very quickly to lower the gas tax, to increase the minimum wage, to put more tax dollars back in your pocket if you're a low-income worker. We help the most vulnerable through the supports for Ontario disability, increasing it by 5%, indexing inflation, never been done before. We did supportive housing yesterday, what we just talked about, an additional $200 million to help the homelessness people in Ontario who are very challenged through no fault of their own, to be able to help them. We put more money in for mental health and addiction to support those who need those types of supports in the community. We're investing in the healthcare system. And you know what? We also yesterday announced indexing the guaranteed annual income supplement for low-income seniors, $200,000. We added another $100,000 to qualify for that program, and the first government to ever index it to inflation. So we've been doing a lot of things. We continue to do things. And you know what? I go around this province, they say, keep going, keep growing this economy, keep getting good jobs, help us with day-to-day expenses, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, that is Ontario Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy joining us here on CP24 Breakfast. Appreciate the time this morning. Thank you.